I never expected that my own son would be the one to take away everything I had worked for. One knock on the door, and my life changed forever. I stood there, frozen, as two uniformed officers handed me an eviction notice. "You need to leave today," they said, and I could only stare, unable to breathe. My name was on the title, but somehow my son had taken it all. How did it come to this? I always believed that when I grew old, my son, Eric, would be there to take care of me. Not because I expected it, but because I thought I had raised him with love and values the way I loved him. I had been through so much to get to this point in my life, losing my first two children, and then, after years of waiting, Eric was born, a miracle. I poured my heart into him, showering him with love, even when I didn't have much. As the years went by, he became the center of my world. I made excuses for him long after I should have stopped. He was my only child, my only family left. Over the years, I trusted him with everything: my bills, my passwords, my mail. He said it was easier if he just took care of it all. I never questioned him. When I asked about my bank statements, he'd say, "It's all online. I'll show you next time." Or, "There's nothing to worry about. It's just an old system acting up." I trusted him completely. I didn't worry because that would mean I didn't trust him, and I really did. But that morning, I woke up to a quiet that was far too still. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, like the calm before a storm. I sat down in my kitchen, sipping my coffee and looking out the window, feeling like the day was eerily familiar, like it mirrored the day my husband passed away. It was gray, with no wind, just a heavy, unsettling stillness. I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of everything falling apart. Then the knock came. At first, I thought it was a neighbor or maybe a delivery, but when I opened the door, there were two officers standing there, holding a clipboard. "Ma'am, are you Evelyn Anderson?" one of them asked. "Yes," I replied, my throat tightening. The next words hit me like a cold slap. "We're here to enforce an eviction from this property. You need to vacate immediately." I couldn't breathe. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely audible. "This is my house. I paid for this house." But they just looked at me, their eyes filled with pity. "Ma'am, we just carry out orders." One of them said, "Do you have someone you can call? I was paralyzed. This was my home paid off, debt-free. How could this be happening?" My mind raced, but my body wouldn't move. I called Eric. When he answered, his voice was casual, as if nothing were wrong. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" I could barely speak. "Eric, they're here to evict me," I said, my voice shaking. There was silence on the other end. "Then," he said nonchalantly, "I was going to talk to you about that. It's no big deal. It was just some business stuff. I had to use your name for some filings." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. "You used me?" I asked quietly, and that was all I could get out. The pain of it was deeper than I could explain. He sighed as if I were the one making a fuss. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of disbelief. How could my son do this to me? How could I have been so blind when I think back on it? I can't help but wonder when I started to lose sight of what truly mattered. I raised my son, Eric, with everything I had: heart, soul, and the little money I could spare. From the moment he was born, after the pain and loss of my first two children, I vowed to love him with all the tenderness I could muster. He was my miracle, the one light in a dark room that had held so much grief. I never wanted him to feel a lack of anything, even when the world seemed to conspire against me. The day Eric was born, I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of purpose. He was everything I had left to love, and I wasn't going to let that love be conditional. I spoiled him, maybe too much, but I didn't care. I watched him grow from a baby into a young man, and though life threw its share of challenges our way, I was always there for him. I poured my energy into being a good mother, making sure that he knew he was my priority. Even when I didn't have much to give, I made sure he had everything he needed. As he got older, he began to take on more responsibilities in our home. He said it was easier if he just took care of the bills, the paperwork, the mail, everything that required attention. I, in my naivety, didn't think twice about it. I trusted him, and for good reason, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can't believe how easily I handed over control. He took care of all the financial matters, managing the bank accounts, paying the bills, even handling my passwords. Whenever I asked about the bank statements, he would wave it off. "It's all online now. Mom, I'll show you next time," he'd say, a reassuring smile on his face. If I noticed any overdue notices piling up, he would brush them aside, claiming it was a mistake. "I'll call them," he'd promise, and I believed him. I had no reason not to. After all, he was my son, the one I had trusted my entire life to. He was my only child, and I believed, without a doubt, that he would always have my back, especially as I grew older. But that morning, everything changed. It was so quiet, too quiet, a silence that seemed to weigh heavy on my chest. I had been sitting in my kitchen, sipping my coffee, staring out the window as I had done for so many years. The sky was overcast, and the stillness in the air reminded me of the day my husband had passed away. It felt as though the world had stopped moving. My mind wandered back to those days of grief and sorrow, and for a moment, I thought that perhaps it was just the weight of those old memories that was making me feel so heavy. Little did I know, it was only the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one I never could have prepared for. Then came the knock at the door. It wasn't a neighbor, nor was it a delivery. It was 2 officers standing on my doorstep with stern faces, one holding a clipboard. I opened the door slowly, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't explain. "Ma'am, are you Evelyn Barnes?" one of them asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice shaky. The words that followed would haunt me for the rest of my life. "We're here to enforce an eviction from this property. You're required to vacate the premises today." I couldn't breathe. My body went numb, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to tilt. "There must be a mistake," I managed to say. "This is my house. I paid off this house years ago." The officer's face remained unchanged, offering no comfort. "We don't make the decisions, ma'am," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We just carry them out." I could barely comprehend what was happening. This was my home, the home I had shared with my late husband, the house where we raised our son, the house where I had worked so hard to build a life. I had no mortgage, no debt. I had no warning. I couldn't understand. What had gone wrong? I immediately called Eric, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eric," I said when he picked up the phone, "there are officers here. They're evicting me. I don't know what's happening." I could hear him sigh on the other end, and then he said, as though it was no big deal, "Oh, I was going to talk to you about that. It's just a business thing that went south. I had to use your name for some paperwork." His voice was nonchalant, and for a moment, I couldn't even find the words to respond. You used me, I finally whispered, barely able to get the words out, and when I said it, it hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just that he had lied to me. It wasn't just that he had stolen from me. It was the fact that he had used my name, my trust, to manipulate me without any regard for the years I had spent caring for him, raising him, loving him. Eric didn't apologize. He didn't seem to understand the gravity of what he had done. I didn't think it would come to this, he said, as though it were no big deal. He told me he had a place for me to stay, some small rented duplex. It wasn't much, but it was temporary, he assured me. I had no choice. I followed him, numbly, to the new place he had arranged. The duplex was small and run down, nothing like the home I had built with my husband. It was cold and damp. There was no warmth, no comfort. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank walls, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I can't stay here, I whispered. It's not safe. But Eric didn't care. It's this or a nursing home, he said, as though he were giving me an ultimatum. My heart broke in that moment. How had it come to this? How had my own son, the one I raised with so much love, reduced me to nothing more than an inconvenience? That was when I realized that love alone wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to protect me from betrayal, from manipulation, from the crushing weight of being used. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. Even in my deepest despair, a part of me held on to the hope that there was something more I could do. I didn't know where to turn, but I knew I couldn't let it end like this. I walked away from Eric, not knowing where I was going or what would come next. I had no place to call home anymore, no family to turn to. It was then that I realized that the world I had known, the world I had built, had been shattered by the very person I had trusted most. And yet, I would find a way to rebuild. I had to. For years, I had put my faith in the one person I thought would never let me down, my son, Eric. I thought that no matter what happened, he would always be there for me, just as I had always been there for him. When I was younger, I had faced great loss. Losing my first 2 children left me hollow, and I had poured every ounce of love and care I had into raising Eric, my miracle. I raised him alone, determined to give him everything I didn't have, and as he grew older, I trusted him to make good decisions, to care for me when I grew older. It was a trust I thought would never be broken. I gave him everything, my heart, my home, and the life I had built. And in return, I thought he would take care of me as I got older. When my health began to decline, I didn't worry because I thought I had done everything I could for him. I raised him right. I believed he would take care of the financial matters, manage the bills, and handle everything that required attention. After all, it was only practical. He said it was easier if he took care of it all, so I let him. I had no reason to suspect that he would do anything wrong. But somewhere along the way, something changed. I trusted him with my finances, with my bank account information, even with the passwords to my life. I thought I was being practical, that I was just letting him handle the things that had become harder for me to manage on my own. I'll take care of everything. Mom, don't worry, he said. I thought he was being responsible. In hindsight, I now see how naive I was. I had stopped questioning him. When I asked about my bank statements, he always brushed me off with some excuse. It's online now. I'll show you next time, he'd say. Or, don't worry, it's all set. If I ever found an overdue notice, he'd laugh it off. It's just a mistake. Mom, I'll call them. But I didn't question him. I trusted him, and that was my mistake. I never saw the warning signs. Not the late fees, not the overdue bills, not the things he told me not to worry about. He assured me it was just temporary, that everything would be fine. How could I have known that behind my back, he was using my name, my credit, and my trust to get himself deeper and deeper into debt? How could I have known that the very person I thought was protecting me was the one setting up my downfall? The morning everything changed began like any other. It was quiet, far too quiet. I woke up as usual, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table, looking out the window, lost in my thoughts. But today, the quiet felt different. It was an unsettling silence, like the calm before a storm. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment everything would unravel. I had been thinking about the past, about my husband, the home we had built together, the memories of raising Eric in that house. It had been our life, our place of refuge, a symbol of everything we had worked for. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I thought about how much that house meant to me, how much it still held the memory of my husband. It was all I had left. Then the knock at the door came. It wasn't a neighbor, nor was it a delivery. It was 2 officers, standing there, holding a clipboard. I opened the door slowly, unsure of what was about to happen. "Ma'am, are you Evelyn Barnes?" one of the officers asked, his voice stern. "Yes," I replied, feeling my throat go dry. "We're here to enforce an eviction from this property." The officer said, "You're required to vacate immediately." I stood there in disbelief. My mind couldn't process the words. This was my house, my home, the house I had built with my husband, the house that was paid off, debt-free. How could this be happening? The officer looked at me with pity, the same kind of pity I had seen on the faces of doctors when they gave me bad news. "We don't make the decisions, ma'am. We're just carrying out the order," he said. "Do you have someone you can call? I couldn't breathe. I had no mortgage, no debts. I had no warning. How was this even possible?" My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone and dialed Eric's number. "Eric, they're here," I said, my voice cracking. "They're evicting me. What is going on?" He answered cheerfully, as though nothing was wrong. "Hey, Mom, I was just about to call you," he said. "What's going on?" "Eric, they're here. They're telling me I have to leave the house. What's happening?" I was frantic, trying to make sense of it all. There was a pause, and then Eric replied casually, "I was going to talk to you about that. It's no big deal. I had to use your name for some filings. It was temporary. I didn't think it would come to this." "You used me?" I asked quietly, the weight of the words sinking in. How could he? How could my own son betray me like this? Eric sighed, like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. "It's not that big of a deal, Mom. I didn't think it would go this far. But it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just some business thing that went wrong. He had used me. He had used my name, my trust, my house, and he didn't even seem to care. He told me he had a place for me to stay, a small rented duplex. It wasn't much, but it was somewhere for me to go. I didn't argue. What could I do? I followed him, numb, to the new place. It wasn't anything like the home we had built together. It was small, cramped, and had no warmth. The basement was damp, the bulb flickered, and there was no privacy. It was a far cry from the home I had known, but Eric didn't care. "It's this or a nursing home," he said dismissively. "Take your pick." I couldn't believe this was happening. The son I had raised, the one I had loved, had turned into someone I didn't recognize. He didn't see me as his mother. He saw me as a burden, something to be discarded when it was convenient for him. The love I had given him, the trust I had placed in him, had meant nothing. I wandered aimlessly, unsure of where to go, unable to comprehend the depths of the betrayal. The streets seemed unfamiliar. Even though I had lived in this town for years, everything felt harder, further away. I felt as if I had lost everything. My knees ached with every step. My hands felt empty. It was then that I found Ariel. She was my lifeline, the one person who still saw me, who still cared. She took my hand, and together, we walked to her friend's house. It wasn't much, but it was a place to rest, a place to find peace, if only for a moment. Ariel didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She was the one person who knew what I had been through, who understood the pain of losing everything. That night, as I sat in a stranger's home, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. How had I allowed myself to be so blind? How had I let my love for Eric cloud my judgment? The truth was, I had trusted too much, and now I was paying the price. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I would fight to get back what was mine. I wasn't going to let my son's betrayal define the rest of my life. The next day, I met Nayan, a lawyer who would change everything for me. She listened to my story, and she promised me that we could fight back. She would help me reclaim my home, my dignity, and my life. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't too late to make things right. I wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed that fateful morning were some of the hardest of my life. I was not just grieving the loss of my home, the place where I had lived for so many years, but I was mourning the loss of trust in the one person I thought would always have my back, my son, Eric. My heart was broken in a way I didn't know was possible, and yet, as the days dragged on, I knew deep down that I couldn't let this betrayal stand. I couldn't let my son's actions destroy the life I had built, the life my husband and I had worked so hard for. No matter how difficult it would be, I had to fight for justice. I was taken to a small, cold duplex that Eric had found for me, a place that made my heart ache every time I stepped foot inside. The basement was damp, the air was stale, and it felt like I had been relegated to the bottom of the world. The old smell of dust and mildew was all around me, and I could feel the sting of regret in my chest as I looked around. My husband and I had worked so hard to build a life in our home, and now that life felt like it had been ripped from me, tossed aside like it meant nothing. How could Eric have let this happen? How could my own flesh and blood do this to me? Eric had told me that I could either stay there in that miserable duplex or go into a nursing home. His words were callous, devoid of any understanding of what I had sacrificed, of what I had given him. He didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a burden. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer the person he cared about. I wasn't the woman who had raised him, the mother who had put him first at every turn. I was just a problem he wanted to get rid of. That night, I sat alone in the basement, feeling like I was drowning. My hands trembled, my body felt numb, and my mind kept racing through everything that had happened. How had I allowed myself to become so blind? How had I let my love for Eric cloud my judgment? The worst part was that I didn't know what to do next. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. But then something inside of me shifted. I knew I couldn't stay there, stuck in that tiny, dark basement. I had to take action. I had to fight for what was mine. It was then that Ariel, my niece, found me. She had come looking for me, worried about how I was handling everything. And when she saw me in that cold, depressing basement, she didn't say anything. She just reached out and took my hand. It was the lifeline I needed. Ariel didn't ask questions. She didn't have to. She was the only one who still saw me, the only one who hadn't turned her back on me. I was still worth something to her, and that gave me the courage I needed to move forward. Ariel didn't leave my side. She helped me gather the little I had left, just a few clothes, some photos, the little pieces of my life I hadn't lost. And when she took me to her friend's house, I felt a small sense of peace. It wasn't much, but it was a place to rest, a place to regroup. It wasn't the life I had once known, but it was a start. I was no longer alone in this battle. That was when I met Nayan, a lawyer who had come highly recommended by a friend of Ariel's. Nayan was calm, professional, and kind. She listened to my story, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Nayan didn't make any promises, but she gave me something I hadn't had in a long time, a sense of agency. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like someone who had the power to fight back, to reclaim my life. "We can fight this," Nayan said, her voice steady. "Your son may have made some grave mistakes, but that doesn't mean you have to lose everything." Nayan began the process of gathering evidence, bank statements, property records, anything that could prove that Eric had taken advantage of me. She pulled up records showing that Eric had used my name to secure a second mortgage against my home. He had used my social security number to take out a loan, and the worst part was that I had never known about it. My mail had been redirected, and all the legal notices had been kept from me. Eric had made sure that I wouldn't see anything that would alert me to what he was doing. He had used me to build his business, signing my name on documents without my consent. And now it seemed like he was trying to erase me from my own life. When Nayan showed me the evidence, I couldn't believe it. I had trusted my son with everything, and now I was staring at documents that bore my name, documents that had been forged, lies that had been built on my trust. My heart sank as I saw my signature on papers I had never signed. The betrayal was deeper than I could have ever imagined. Nayan didn't hesitate. She filed a request for an emergency injunction to stop the eviction, and she began the process of filing a quiet title action, a legal maneuver that would allow me to reclaim ownership of my home. She also pressed charges for elder financial abuse and fraud. It wasn't an easy road ahead, but Nayan assured me that we were on solid ground. The first hearing in court was a blur. I was nervous, unsure of what to expect, but Nayan stood by me the entire time. She filed motions, presented the evidence, and made sure that the judge understood the gravity of the situation. Maurice, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He had his lawyer by his side, but he didn't seem to understand the seriousness of what he had done. He tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that I had willingly entrusted him with my finances. But Nayan wasn't having it. "This is not a misunderstanding," Nayan stated firmly, her voice steady. "This is elder financial abuse. My client did not sign these documents. She did not consent to this loan. Her son took advantage of her. And now we are asking for the court to protect her and return what is rightfully hers." The judge listened carefully and granted the injunction. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But there was still so much to be done. The road to reclaiming my home, to holding Eric accountable for what he had done, was just beginning. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Nayan, I had Ariel, and I had the strength to fight for what was mine. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and court appearances. But the hardest part was facing Eric. I had always believed that he would be the one to take care of me, that he would be the one to protect me in my old age. Instead, he had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I didn't know how to reconcile the son I had raised with the man who had done this to me. One day, Eric texted me, asking me to come pick up my things from the truck where he had left them. He seemed indifferent, like it was no big deal. I stared at the text for a long time before I responded. I had to see him, had to face him one last time. I had to tell him how I felt. When I arrived at the house where Eric was staying, I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. It was still the same small place, the one that had never felt like home. Eric was standing by the truck, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He looked at me, but there was no apology in his eyes, only anger, like I was the one who had wronged him. I took a deep breath and walked up to him. "You used me," I said, my voice trembling. "You took everything I worked for. You took my house, my home, and you looked me in the face and told me to sleep in a basement." Eric scoffed. His eyes filled with frustration. "I told you it was temporary," he said dismissively. "I trusted you," I whispered, "and you betrayed me." It was then that I realized that the son I had raised was gone. The man standing before me was someone I didn't recognize. But I wasn't going to let him define me anymore. I wasn't going to let his actions destroy me. That was when I decided I had to do what was right for me. I was done being a victim. I was done letting Eric's betrayal define my life. And with Nain's help, I would reclaim my home, no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was. I was going to fight for justice, and I would win. When I think about the first time I walked back into my home after everything that had happened, it still feels surreal. My hands shook as I turned the key in the lock, the familiar click echoing in the quiet of the house. But nothing was the same, not the house, not the memories, and certainly not the person I had once been. I had walked away from everything once, not knowing if I would ever return. But now, after everything that had happened, betrayal, loss, heartache, I was determined to find my way back, not just to my home, but to myself. It's difficult to explain the feeling of returning to a place where so many memories had been made good and bad. The house that my husband and I had built together was supposed to be a symbol of everything we had accomplished, everything we had shared. It was supposed to be the one constant in my life, the place I could always come back to, no matter what. But now, it felt hollow. The walls seemed to hold the weight of all the lies and deception that had taken place. The air in the house was thick with the remnants of the betrayal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the place I had once called home was no longer mine. It had been a long road to get here. After I was evicted, everything had felt like a blur. The small duplex that Eric had forced me into was a far cry from the home I had built with my husband. It was cold, dark, and oppressive. But more than the physical discomfort, it was the emotional toll that it took on me. I had lost everything I held dear, and in that moment, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had trusted Eric, my own son, more than I had trusted anyone, and he had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The lies, the manipulation, the complete disregard for everything I had done for him. It was like I had been living in a dream, and I had finally woken up to reality. But even in the darkest moments, I found a glimmer of hope. Ariel, my niece, had been my lifeline. She was the one who had found me after I had been forced out of my home, and she had never once left my side. When I needed someone to talk to, she was there. When I needed a shoulder to cry on, she was there. I had no idea what I would have done without her. She made sure I knew that I wasn't alone, even when I felt like I had lost everything. Nan, the lawyer who had come to my aid, had also been a beacon of hope. She didn't treat me like a victim. She didn't pity me. She treated me with respect. And more importantly, she treated me like someone who had the power to fight back. She helped me understand the legal process, gave me the courage to take action, and made sure that I knew that it wasn't too late to right the wrongs that had been done. Together, Nayan and Ariel helped me reclaim my life. They gave me the strength I needed to face my son, Eric, and stand up to him for everything he had done. It wasn't an easy fight. Every day, I had to confront the reality of what Eric had done. He had taken everything from me, my house, my trust, my sense of security. And I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life from the wreckage he had left behind. But with Nain's help, I was able to take legal action. We filed for a quiet title action to reclaim ownership of my house. And we filed charges for elder financial abuse and fraud against Eric. The process was long and exhausting, but I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't stop. There were days when I wanted to give up, days when the pain of betrayal felt too heavy to bear, but I didn't. I couldn't. I had spent too many years building a life that was worth fighting for. My husband and I had worked hard to create a home for our family, and I wasn't going to let my son tear it all down. He had already taken so much from me, but he wasn't going to take my dignity. He wasn't going to take my future. The court hearings were a whirlwind of emotions. Every time I stepped into that courtroom, I had to remind myself that I was there for a reason. I wasn't there to punish Eric, but I was there to protect what was mine. I was there to protect my home, my legacy, and my sense of self-worth. But with each hearing, with each new piece of evidence that came to light, I realized how deep Eric's betrayal really ran. He had used my name to secure loans, forged my signature, and manipulated me into believing everything was fine. And when I looked at him in that courtroom, I didn't see the son I had raised. I saw a man who had been consumed by greed and selfishness. I can't explain the mix of emotions that ran through me as I faced Eric in court. Part of me wanted to reach out to him, to forgive him and pretend like everything was fine. But another part of me knew that I couldn't. He had taken too much. He had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. And for the first time, I realized that loving someone didn't mean accepting their wrongdoings. Loving someone meant standing up for what was right, even when it meant standing up to them. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. The judge granted the quiet title action, and my home was officially returned to me. It wasn't an easy victory, and it didn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it was a victory, nonetheless. It was a sign that I could still reclaim my life, that I could still stand tall after everything had been taken from me. And while the legal process wasn't over, there were still charges to be pressed against Eric for elder abuse and fraud. I knew that I had taken the first step toward healing. I had reclaimed my home, and more importantly, I had reclaimed my power. The days that followed were filled with both relief and grief. The house I had once known felt different. It was still my home, but it was no longer the same place it had been. The memories of my husband, of raising Eric in that house, were now mixed with the pain of betrayal. But as I stood on the porch, looking at the house that I had fought so hard to keep, I knew that it was mine again, and that was enough for now. I spent the next few weeks cleaning, not just the house, but myself. Scrubbing away the remnants of the past, I began to reclaim my life. I wasn't fixing the house, I was waking it up. The house had been a symbol of my family, of everything I had loved, and now it was a symbol of my strength, my resilience. I was no longer the woman who had been blinded by love and trust. I was the woman who had fought back, who had stood up for herself and won. As the days went by, I began to feel more at peace. I knew that I would never forget what Eric had done to me. I would never forget the pain of being betrayed by the one person I had trusted most. But I also knew that I couldn't let that pain define me. I had a life to rebuild, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my son, take that away from me. It wasn't an easy road, and there were still days when the weight of everything felt like too much to bear. But with each passing day, I knew that I was moving closer to healing. I was moving closer to reclaiming my sense of self. And I would never forget the lesson I had learned, that love and trust are precious gifts, and that sometimes the hardest thing we can do is walk away from those who don't deserve them. In the end, I was not just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace of mind. And that was something no one, especially not my son, could take away from me. It was hard to pinpoint the exact moment when I realized that I had been living in denial for far too long. For months, maybe even years, I had allowed myself to believe that the love I gave to my son, Eric, would protect me, that the bond we shared would keep me safe. I had always believed that family was the most important thing, that nothing would ever come between us. But somewhere along the way, my trust had been exploited. The person I had raised, the one I had loved unconditionally, had become a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had used me and thrown me away like a forgotten object. The day I was evicted from my own home was a day that would haunt me forever. When the sheriff knocked on my door and handed me an eviction notice, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my house, the one I had built with my husband, the one we had worked so hard for. I had no mortgage. I had no debt. How could I be facing eviction? How could this be happening to me after everything I had sacrificed for my son? But it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some cruel joke. This was real. Eric had used my name, my trust, my very identity to secure loans and put everything I owned at risk. I had never even seen the bank statements. I had trusted him with everything, and in return, he had betrayed me in the worst way possible. He had put his own needs and desires above mine, without any regard for the years I had spent caring for him, raising him, loving him. When I called Eric to ask what was going on, I couldn't believe the nonchalance in his voice. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't apologetic. He didn't even seem to care. He had been behind the whole thing, using my name to secure a second mortgage and take out a loan I had no knowledge of. He had redirected my mail, intercepted my legal notices, and made sure that I never knew what was happening. And when I confronted him, he had the audacity to tell me that it was all temporary and that it wasn't a big deal. He told me not to worry, but how could I not worry when my own son had betrayed me so completely? It was in that moment that I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep letting him manipulate me. I couldn't keep putting my trust in someone who had shown me, time and time again, that I didn't matter to him. It was time to take action. It was time to fight for myself, for my dignity, and for everything I had built. I didn't know where to turn at first. The betrayal had cut so deep, and the pain felt like it would swallow me whole. But then Ariel, my niece, stepped in. She found me, sitting alone and broken in the small rented duplex Eric had forced me into. And she reminded me that I wasn't alone. Ariel didn't pity me. She didn't make me feel like a victim. Instead, she made me feel like I still had a chance, like I still had a voice, like I still mattered. Ariel brought me to her friend's house, a safe space where I could begin to breathe again. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the first step toward rebuilding my life. Ariel stayed by my side, offering me comfort, strength, and encouragement. I felt like I was starting to wake up from a nightmare, like I could finally see things clearly. I wasn't going to let Eric's actions define me anymore. I was going to take control of my life again. That's when we met Nayan, a lawyer who would change everything for me. Nayan was calm, confident, and kind. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like a person who had the right to stand up for herself. When I told her my story, she listened with compassion and then said the words I needed to hear. You can fight this. You can get your life back. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Maybe I could still fix things. Maybe I could still reclaim the life that had been taken from me. Nayan immediately set to work. She gathered the evidence, bank statements, property records, anything that could prove that Eric had taken advantage of me. She uncovered the truth behind the second mortgage Eric had taken out without my knowledge. She discovered that he had forged my signature, used my social security number, and manipulated me into believing everything was fine. He had used me to secure loans for his business, and when it all fell apart, I was the one who was left to pick up the pieces. But Nayan didn't stop there. She filed a request for an emergency injunction to stop the eviction, and she began the process of filing a quiet title action to reclaim ownership of my home. She also pressed charges for elder financial abuse and fraud against Eric. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was long, and there were many hurdles to overcome. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. Nayan was on my side. Ariel was on my side. And I was ready to fight for what was mine. The court hearings were grueling. Each time I walked into that courtroom, I had to remind myself why I was there. I wasn't there to punish Eric, but I was there to protect myself. I was there to reclaim my dignity, to take back my life, to prove that I wasn't going to let my son's betrayal define me. The more I learned about Eric's actions, the more disgusted I became. He had used me, manipulated me, and lied to me. But I couldn't let that anger consume me. I had to stay focused. I had to stay strong. Throughout the legal process, I faced numerous obstacles. Eric's lawyer tried to paint the situation as a simple family misunderstanding, a case of poor communication, but Nayan wasn't having it. She presented the evidence, showing that Eric had intentionally deceived me, forging my signature, redirecting my mail, and taking out loans without my consent. The judge listened carefully, and I could see that the truth was beginning to sink in. The first victory came when the judge granted the emergency injunction, halting the eviction process. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a chance. I wasn't going to lose my home. I wasn't going to let Eric take everything from me. The next step was the quiet title action, which would officially return ownership of my home to me, free from any fraudulent claims. But the real turning point came when Nayan filed criminal charges for elder financial abuse and fraud against Eric. I had never imagined that I would have to take my own son to court, but I knew it was the only way to hold him accountable for what he had done. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure that no one else would be hurt the way I had been. The day the charges were filed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman who had taken control of her life, who had stood up for herself and fought back. I was no longer defined by Eric's betrayal. I was defined by my strength, by my ability to reclaim what was mine. As the days passed, I began to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The house, which had once felt like a prison, slowly began to feel like home again. I spent days cleaning, not just the house, but myself. I scrubbed away the remnants of the past, wiped away the memories of betrayal, and began to rebuild. I wasn't fixing the house, I was waking it up. And in doing so, I was waking myself up. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the pain of betrayal threatened to overwhelm me, but I knew that I wasn't alone. I had Ariel, who continued to support me. I had Nain, who had fought for me every step of the way. And most importantly, I had myself. I had found my voice again. I had reclaimed my power. It wasn't a perfect ending. I had lost a lot: my trust, my peace of mind, my sense of security. But I had gained something far more important. I had gained my independence, my dignity, and my strength. And with that, I knew I could face anything that came my way. I had fought for my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. There is a saying that I always remember. Sometimes the truth takes time to emerge, but when it does, it can change your whole life. I never expected that the person I devoted my life to, my son, would turn out to be the one who made me lose everything. Only when I was at the most painful crossroads did I realize that sometimes blind love can make you lose yourself. In my story, my son took advantage of my trust, leading me into a situation I never imagined. It was really painful to realize that love is not always reciprocated with appreciation. But then I learned a valuable lesson in the most painful moments. When everything seems to be falling apart, you need to stand up and take back control of your life. No one has the right to decide your future but you. Remember, no matter how difficult life gets, you can always find the strength within yourself to overcome it. Never let hurt or anyone make you forget your own worth. We don't have to endure betrayal or hurt, and we have the power to change to live a more worthy life. If you are going through difficult moments in life, don't hesitate to share your story in the comments section. Let us know how you overcome the challenges, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspirational stories. You deserve to have a happy and fulfilling life, and we are always here to accompany you.